Hello guys, Ancient Gameplays, I'm Fabio Pisco and welcome for my channel, Somebody some weeks ago actually told me you should make a video about how to optimize Windows, with some tips and so on, and I thought to myself, but I already made one and it wasn't much time ago. Well, it was over 3 years, and when I saw that video I saw myself talking and I was like, damn. This is really cringe. And then the remaining gigabytes for games, apps, and so on. And this for two particular reasons. The first one is that on HDDs the access time takes longer. So if you actually make... So I'm now making a new video since I acquired a lot of new information over the years, and I'm now bringing them to you in how to optimize Windows 11 or Windows 10 as well for gaming and non-gaming scenarios. So let's go to our first tip, but before, today's video sponsor is GVG Mall, bringing you lots of software deals like Windows 10, Windows 11, Office 2019 or 2021 with a new Windows 11 design, and for all of these you can use my SKG discount code for 30% off, getting a Windows 11 serial key for $22 and a Windows 10 one for only $15. Then use the key on your Windows settings and you'll have an activated system. One of the most important things is drivers, especially when we're talking about GPU and chipset ones. And one thing that is very important is to make sure that they are properly installed. You might not know, but there are several cases where the driver installation bugs, so you need to kind of clean install it to make sure everything is working as intended. And there are even some times where the previous drivers from your previous GPU stay installed, and installing your new GPU drivers on top of them makes the system go bananas. And that happened to me before actually, where the NVIDIA drivers didn't get properly uninstalled after I switched to an AMD GPU and were giving me odd glitches and crashes and even blue screens sometimes. So I had to use DDU once more to remove the current drivers, and the second time without installing any drivers for DDU to recognize the previous NVIDIA drivers and uninstall them as well. And things were so messed up that once again, DDU was recognizing the NVIDIA drivers even though I had an AMD card installed. So sometimes you actually have to do this, a clean driver installation. The second one is what people like to call un-bloating Windows, and it comes basically just disabling things that come enabled with Windows, some things, and disabling or uninstalling some software that comes also with Windows and should be unwanted by anyone. But for that, let's go to that PC in order to show you things properly step by step. And while this part isn't really hard, all you have to do is start by right-clicking on your desktop, go to the display settings, open them, and then you have, of course, the system settings. That's where it opens. And the first thing that you want to do is go to the privacy and security settings. You open them, and here you have all these options like Windows Security, Find My Device, and so on. We can start with Find My Device, for example, if you don't really use it and you have it enabled, automatic off. Then you have general, speech, inking, and so on. You can start with the general, put everything to off. For example, let apps show me personalized ads by using my advertising ID. Nope. Show me suggested content in the settings app. Nope. Then you have speech, inking, and so on. For example, speech off. Inking and typing personalization. So if you don't use any of these settings, the first thing that you want to do is disable them, of course. For example, diagnostics and feedback. This setting can actually reduce your performance because it keeps sending optional data to Microsoft and so on, and it can decrease the performance. So make sure that this one is disabled as well. Then you have several other settings like, for example, search permissions, searching Windows, activity history. I don't want activity history to be stored, so off once again. And then you have all these ones in terms of apps permission for location, camera, voice activation, notifications, everything. So for example, if you don't really use phone calls, just go here, off. If you don't use anything else, like for example, tasks, off as well. And you have other things like radios, off. I don't want radios on, so yeah, they call history, apps, diagnostic, off. Everything to off, and that's basically what you can do here. But then you can go further and use this app called Revo Uninstaller. And this app can actually uninstall things that Windows doesn't let you uninstall. Things like, for example, I believe that some of the Windows applications can now be uninstalled, like Cortana and so on, but they previously couldn't be. And With Revo Uninstaller, you can clean install your files, and I mean really clean install. For example, wargaming.net Game Center. You just go here, you go continue. It will disable or it will uninstall the software. For example, delete Game Center preferences, uninstall. You uninstall the game, and after you uninstall the game or the application, you have the performing the initial analysis and uninstall, and you can select several scanning modes like safe, moderate, and advanced. You go for advanced, and Revo Uninstaller will find the leftovers in the registry. And as you can see, all you have to do is select all, delete. Bam. And it will also find the leftover files and folders, which is also nice. So folders on program data and so on. Revo Uninstaller will find them, select all, delete, bam. And now you have a finished or a clean uninstallation of any software that you want to uninstall. And now we have this part, which is really interesting, Windows apps. Like I told you before, you can open it and you can uninstall anything, even if Microsoft doesn't allow you to. Let's say, for example, Cortana. If Microsoft doesn't allow you to uninstall Cortana, at least it didn't before, you can just go here, Cortana, continue, and as you can see, it will open the PowerShell and it will disable and uninstall Cortana entirely. Once again, leftover registry files, bam, done. If you want to uninstall Game Bar, the same. If you want to uninstall Cross-Device Experience Host, the same. It can uninstall anything that you have here. Once again, phone link, bam, PowerShell once again opening, and it will run it till it uninstalls the phone link entirely. Even if Windows doesn't let you uninstall it, Revo Uninstaller will uninstall it, which is, again, great. When you install applications, most of them will be set up to boot automatically as soon as you boot into Windows. And it happens that most times, like 99.9% of times, you don't need those applications to start up at Windows Startup, because that of course will slow the Windows Startup, and those applications you will only need them when you actually need them and you're going to start them up. So for that, you go into the Task Manager by pressing Ctrl plus Shift plus Escape simultaneously. Then open the Startup Apps tab and deselect boot from all the apps that you don't need. I, for example, only leave the antivirus to boot, usually not 32, to Windows usually, which makes things much faster. For me, 1 or 2 startup apps are more than enough and will definitely make things load faster. Once again, I usually just let, for example, Asset Not 32, which is the antivirus, and the Rocket application to kind of select the LEDs on the keyboard and so on. Anything besides that, I'll just disable because I don't really need it, and it will just be, well, slowing down my boot times. After Windows 8, we were introduced to Windows apps. So we have the normal applications, and we have the normal applications, and then we have the apps, which once again were introduced with Metro. And even though they were kind of toned down a bit with Windows 10 and Windows 11, they're still there, and most times they're running in the background. Once again, hogging resources. And once again, even though you don't see them, those apps are still there, being them simple things like, for example, calculator, clock, photos, etc. With this being said, some of them are still consuming resources in the background, and you can stop them. All you have to do is go into your Windows settings, apps, installed apps, and then navigate to one of them, like Cortana for example, press the 3 dots on the right and select Advanced Options. There you'll be presented with some background apps permission, and you just choose the option Never, and that app will never run in the background again. And this, although this isn't really useful for the newest computers that are very, way faster than they were before. Now we have SSDs, we have lots of RAM with 32 gigabytes being the norm. Even though that doesn't really help a lot there, it will help a lot when it comes to older computers or kind of lower end computers. In that scenario, I really advise you to take a look into this because it's a win-win situation. The only thing that you lose is time by doing this. But yeah, win-win. Now this one is interesting. Before having the newer Windows versions, the startup programs were selected with a system configuration menu that can be opened by typing msconfig in the search bar. This menu has the General, Boot, Services, Startup, and Tool tabs. There's not much left to do there, of course, but you can always select the options like Safe Boot in case you want to reboot in safe mode in an easy way, select the No GUI boot option, the amount of time you have to choose between operating systems in case you're running 2 or more, or even disable some services in an easy way. Be aware though that disabling some services may cause system instability, may cause some crashes, so be aware and search them properly before disabling them. But I believe that you'll be mostly benefiting from the boot tab only and not really those ones like the services and so on, so on, so on. Now this one is interesting. What is Windows Page File? Page file, as stated by Microsoft, is a physical extension of RAM that enables the system to remove infrequently accessed modified pages from the physical memory to let the system use the physical memory more efficiently for more frequently accessed pages. So the page file is kind of a virtual memory file that Windows creates on your hard drive or on your disk, in case you are using an NVMe, of course. And from what I understand, this file is used to store things that aren't used for RAM or aren't used by RAM as much. Once again, infrequently used. They are put in the system page file in case you don't really have enough RAM, because otherwise it will just be stored there. But if you don't have enough RAM, system will go and put the more infrequently used files there on your system page file, like there on your hard drive or on your disk, to kind of save space for the other more used files. And again, when you run out of RAM, Windows will use that same page file, meaning that it will use your disk as RAM since you don't really have enough, and when that happens it might lead to massive stutters and performance drops, as even NVMe SSDs, of course, are many times slower than a normal DDR4 or DDR5 RAM kit. But this was more noticeable with older hard drives since they were much slower than the current SSDs, of course, especially when it came to access times. So my opinion is, today's SSDs are pretty fast, and even though you really need to use the system page file or the Windows page file to kind of cache some things on your disk that in case you run out of RAM, of course, it won't really be an issue. Now, if you're running a hard drive, an HDD, well, that's a different story, because as soon as Windows page file starts getting used, you'll kind of get some really nasty stutters. Possibly when loading new phases of the game, it will crash a lot. Things like that, because it will try to kind of free RAM and it will use the page file for that transition, kind of putting their files and then grabbing them again. And once again, even an NVMe, even a PCI Express 5 NVMe is much slower than DDR4 or DDR5. But again, if you really want to maximize performance, you can disable Windows page file. But take in consideration that your system will crash if it runs out of RAM since it can't use the page file, and even if it doesn't crash, some games might simply just quit to desktops. So take that in consideration before you disable Windows page file. Just saying. The seventh tip is to clean older Windows installations. As soon as you go to your Windows update and you update to a newer version, as soon as you do kind of a big update or you install Windows on top of your current Windows, you'll have the older Windows files, and that will take up space in your hard drive, in your disk. And this doesn't really help the performance, but at least it helps you know that you have that folder, usually called windows.old, on your C drive, which is once again usually the Windows drive, and that folder is there in case you want to revert or go back to your previous Windows version. Let's now, for example, that the Windows 24 H2 has been released, or H2 has been released, and you are running the 23 H2 and you upgrade to the 24 H2, but you have issues. So that folder is there so you can revert back to the 23 H2 or 23 H2. That's what it serves for and can really save your ass in some situations. But if you're pretty sure that everything is stable, you can simply delete that folder to save some space. For that, just go to the search bar and type disk cleanup. Select your C drive, which is usually the Windows drive, press disk cleanup for your Windows drive once again, and you should have an older Windows installation option available to select. Do it, press OK, and the files will be deleted in a safe way. And in some cases, it can actually save you up to 40 gigabytes. There was a time where I actually had like 60 gigabytes of Windows installations. And if you're running, let's say, a 256 gigabytes NVMe or even 512 gigabytes, 60 gigabytes is enough to install some of even current days games like Frostpunk 2 and so on. So, just saying. And now we have trim and defragmentation options, with trim being used for SSDs and defragmentation being used for HDDs. Older hard drives were like vinyls with a disk and a needle inside to read the data. What happens is that if you install a game in your hard drive, it won't install the entire game in the same part of the disk. It will install the game across several sectors, and when the game is running, the hard drive has to read a bit of information from one sector, another bit from another bit from another, and that will most likely cause stutters. And defragmentation fixes that as it grabs all the related files and puts them close to each other, most times fixing the previous stutters that you had. As for trim, it is a command that tells SSDs which data blocks they can erase, allowing the SSD's controller to more efficiently manage the store space available for data, which of course will improve the performance as well. For this, you go to the search bar and type defrag. Open the defragment and optimize drives option, of course, and then simply select your SSD or HDD and trim or defragment them for better overall performance. And of course, trimming an SSD will be really fast, but defragment an hard drive can actually take some time, especially if you have, let's say, a 2 terabytes or a 4 terabytes HDD or even more than that, and you never ever defragmented it. Well, it may take like 1 hour, 2 hours, it kind of depends, so just take that in consideration. In case you've been running Windows for quite some time and not clean installing Windows from time to time, of course, and especially if you have several updates on top of your Windows installation, and even more if you had some crashes in between, crashing that may occur when you're overclocking and testing system stability, then you might have disk errors. And these can cause several types of issues like green screens, blue screens, etc. And to get rid of those, you just need to go to your PC, right-click on your disk. You can do it for all your disks if you want to, of course. Go to the Properties, Tools tab, and in the error checking menu, select Check, then let it complete the process, of course, and Windows will let you know if there were errors and if they got fixed or not, or if they are able to get fixed or not. So just take that in mind, because you might have disk errors and you don't really know it. This tip has to do with disk partitions, and this applies to SSDs and HDDs as well. But as stated before, it applies mostly to HDDs as their access times are way higher than the SSDs. Imagine that if for some odd thing you're still running a system with only one hard drive. In case that happens, you want to divide that disk in two partitions, one for the Windows and another one for the games and larger applications. Now, why, you ask? Because Windows will be installed in a much smaller portion of the hard drive, which will allow it to access things faster, as it knows it doesn't have to scout across the whole drive in case you didn't defragment things, leading to better performance. And in terms of SSDs, they're much faster, of course, but this still applies for one reason: ease of use. Let's say you're running a small 256GB SSD for Windows and some applications, of course, and a 2TB SSD for games. Each time you need to clean install Windows, for example, all your games will still be there, as you installed Windows on a different disk, and clean installing it won't remove anything that isn't in that same disk. And you can do the same with a bigger, let's say, 2TB SSD. You can just go to the partitions and create two partitions on that same 2TB SSD, for example, 512GB for your system, and the other 1.5 terabytes, close to that, of course, for your games and applications. And when you install Windows on that same partition, only that 512GB partition, it won't erase the games data and so on that you have on the other partition, which is a very good thing to have. Once again, ease of use. And yeah, the light just went down. Windows power plants are an interesting topic, because they are really important for mobile devices, for laptops, for example, and handheld devices. But at the same time, those two, the most recent of those two, don't really let you change the power plan on Windows at all. But what about desktop computers? Should you use high performance, balanced, ultimate performance? Well, that depends. If you're using a Ryzen 9 CPU, you should consider watching the video I did some days ago, where I showed that the dual CCD CPUs, again, the Ryzen 9 series, you can benefit from using balanced mode, but I can tell you right away that if you want the best performance you can get at the expense of a little more idle power draw, you want to use the high performance mode to avoid possible stutters and latency due to core parking wrongly kicking in some situations. That happens still. So, Ryzen 9 may be balanced. Everything else, high performance. And by the way, I'm talking about high performance in the older control panel, because if you're using Windows 11, you have the new settings with the power modes and so on, but those power modes will only be available if you select the balanced mode in the old control panel. As soon as you select high performance in the old control panel, those settings will just be deactivated, just for you to know. So we're talking about the settings, the power plans in the old control panel, not in the new settings. Now Windows Game Mode. According to the benchmarks I've done so far, it seems more kind of a placebo than anything else. And some people state that having it on reduces the latency, but I see virtually no difference in between both, even on that regard. The thing that Game Mode helps you with is not receiving any kind of notifications when gaming, because Windows knows that you're running a game and won't bring you any kind of notifications in order to, well, kind of minimize the game or so on. So that's a good thing. Now, if you really want to have the maximum or the best experience you can get, yeah, definitely use game mode. But in terms of FPS, the difference will be null. Superfetch. Damn, before remaking this video, I haven't heard that word for years, believe me. Windows Superfetch, which is now called SysMain, I believe, is kind of a Windows service that keeps running or loading things in the background, things that you are supposedly using a lot, for when you run them for the first time to be faster. The thing is, this consumes resources, and while with the most current PCs this isn't an issue, of course, especially since CPUs nowadays are quite powerful and almost anyone has an SSD, but if you're running an older build or just want to take advantage of the maximum performance you can get, then you can disable it, and your system will only cache things when you run them. For this, you type services.msc on your search bar, open the window, go to the SysMain part, right-click on the SysMain, Properties, and in the Startup Type part, you choose Disabled. After that, you can restart your computer or simply force stop the service on the fly. And believe me, this will really help you in some older systems or with some older systems. Now this one has to do with system visuals, and it doesn't really help you performance-wise. It just makes Windows feel more snappy. It just makes it feel like it is more responsive per se. Because of course it disables all the fancy effects and motion blurs and so on, so on, so on. For that you go to your PC, Properties, Advanced Settings, and then to the Performance Settings. There you are allowed to choose which effects you want to use or not on the fly. And some people will disable all the effects to have Windows feel snappier, but I believe that's a personal taste. So I advise you to test them one by one and see which one you like or not. That's always the better solution. And the light went off again. Jesus Christ, these days really, this is kind of, I mean, fuck this shit. And about this one, it might be kind of controversial for some people, but those to me might have Munchausen's syndrome, or of course they don't really know much about the topic. And jokes aside, I'm saying this because I made a video about core isolation and how it decreased CPU performance in some case scenarios due to security reasons. Since Windows uses processing power to isolate your processes in real time and so on, the thing is, nothing is safe. Nothing. If somebody really wants to get in your computer, they will get in your computer. That's 100% sure. It might take more time or less time, but they will, of course, unless you disconnect the internet. But back to core isolation, you can disable it by typing memory integrity or core isolation on your search bar and then disable the memory integrity option and reboot your system. This made my 7800X3D go from 160 FPS on Flight Simulator to the usual 200 FPS it had most times. But now you might ask, well, isn't this really necessary? In my opinion, nope. And that's not only me, because most recent motherboard BIOS like AM4, AM5 and maybe some Intel devices as well, they come with virtualization disabled on BIOS. And if virtualization is disabled, it means that core isolation won't work just from the start. You just go disable virtualization on Windows, or on the BIOS in this case, and the option won't even appear to you on Windows because it will be disabled from the start. Meaning that almost everyone nowadays at stock, at default, have this option disabled. And guess what? Yeah, nobody's computer is kind of blowing up and things, so yeah.
Don't let your dreams be dreams.
So once again, I believe that anyone telling you to not disable this because of security reasons doesn't really understand that everyone can be hacked. Even NASA gets hacked for breakfast and lunch and so on. They can get into NASA like really easy. They can get into several other things really easy. So if someone really wants to get in your computer, they will, and core isolation won't do shit. Unless you are doing some really shady things, just skip it off and enjoy your better CPU performance. And the final one is overclocking, and I know this is a more hardware related thing, of course, not really related to Windows itself, but it always helps. And CPUs are really not worth overclocking nowadays, as you get around 10% more performance, 15 if you're lucky enough, at the expense of a much higher power draw usually. But when it comes to RAM, for example, you can tweak your timings and subtimings without messing with the frequency at all and get a big performance uplift in some cases, like seen in this video passing right now on the screen. And there's also GPU overclocking and undervolting that in some scenarios can lead you up to 10-15% better performance at the same power draw. And if you're lucky enough in the draw of the GPUs, well, you can actually get 10-15% more performance at lower power draw than stock. So that's a win-win. And if you don't know how to tweak your system that way, you can just go to my video section. I have lots of tutorials, GPU overclocking, GPU undervolting, CPU, RAM, etc. I have it all there on my video section. So just go to my video section and enjoy the knowledge that I'm trying to pass to you. Yeah, that's it. And well guys, that's all for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, sorry for anything. I'm still messing around with lighting. I'm still messing around with the sound. Once again, it has lots of echo and reverb, much better than it was, but still has a lot. I still need to work it out much better. And yeah, once again, thank you very much for watching. Leave your comment in the comment section if you have any doubt, and I'll answer as fast as I can. Thank you very much, and see you in the next video because the camera battery is going to die soon. Cheers.